I've returned to Aghaboe Abbey in County Laois to tell you more about this hugely important ecclesiastical settlement, which, as I described in a previous video, was founded by St. Canice in the 6th century. Nothing remains today of the original abbey buildings founded by St. Canice sometime between the years 558 and 577. From the late 8th century onwards, Irish religious settlements, particularly monasteries, were repeatedly invaded and plundered by the Norsemen, also known as the Scandinavian Vikings. Aghaboe Abbey did not escape, and in the year 913 and again in 915 it was plundered by the Norsemen. These raids caused devastation, leading to killings, the enslavement of monks, and devastation. In the year 1052, a church was erected here in which the relics of St. Canice were placed. Around the year 1100, Aghaboe was noted as a place of resort for religious pilgrims. Further misfortune was to follow when, at the beginning of Lent in the year 1116, the Abbey of Aghaboe was destroyed by fire. At this period, Aghaboe was the episcopal see of Upper Ossory, having taken over that role from Sir Kieran in County Offaly. But that status was short-lived, as Kilkenny supplanted Aghaboe as the episcopal see and cathedral church of the diocese around the year 1180, and the cathedral seat or ceremonial chair from Aghaboe was removed to St. Canice's Cathedral in Kilkenny in 1250. Following the monastery fire in 1116, a new church was built later in the 12th century as an Augustinian priory on the site currently occupied by the Church of Ireland. According to O'Hanlon's History of the Queen's County, on the 13th of May 1346, Dermot MacGillipatrick, who was known as the One-Eyed, led an assault on the town of Aghaboe, burning the town, the cemetery and the church, including the shrine and relics of St. Canice. All that remains of that church is the belfry attached to the present Church of Ireland. The top section of the belfry is of more recent construction, most likely in line with the construction of the current Church of Ireland parish church, which was built in 1818. This holy water font, near the front of the Church of Ireland, is also believed to have been salvaged from the burnt 12th century church. And the three medieval heads above the door of the church are also believed to be remnants of the Augustinian church. Around the year 1382, Finghin MacKillip built this friary for the Dominican order, and monks from that order continued to serve here for the next 400 years. Somehow, some Dominicans continued to survive here following the dissolution or suppression of the monasteries that occurred throughout Ireland between 1536 and 1541, when King Henry VIII disbanded all Catholic monasteries, priories and convents. The history of the Queen's County records that in 1756 the Reverend Dominican Father and Brother James Williams was titular prior at Aghaboe. He laboured well among the poor Catholics of the place. Towards the close of the penal days, only a single Dominican friar lurked in the neighbourhood of the deserted friary at Aghaboe. On the south side of the Abbey Church is Phelan's Chapel, which is entered by two Gothic arches with 3 windows, 2 in the east side and 1 in the south. This chapel was built later than the Abbey church, and it is believed to have got its name from the Abbey's first prior, John of Whalen. And so, following the departure of the last of the Dominicans in the 18th century, the monastic buildings began to fall into a state of disrepair, and over time they deteriorated badly to the extent that when the history of the Queen's County was published in 1907, it stated that they were soon destined for the miserable spectacle they now present. Looking at the magnificent condition the ruins present today, it is incredible to learn that in 1974, Laois County Council was preparing to issue an order for the demolition of the Abbey buildings. Fortunately, a group of local volunteers stepped in and began the mammoth task of restoring the Abbey to the well-maintained state that we see today. The Aghaboe Abbey Preservation Committee was thereby born for the purpose of preserving the ruins of Aghaboe Abbey. Prompted initially by the impending visit in 1974 of a group of Austrians from Salzburg coming on a visit to Aghaboe to mark the 12th centenary of the founding of Salzburg Cathedral by St. Virgilius, or Fergal of Aghaboe, the committee began by clearing ivy and bushes from the area surrounding the abbey, clearing the interior and laying gravel. The graveyard was a wilderness and could only be accessed in parts, although it was and continues to be an active burial ground for Church of Ireland burials on the left and Catholic burials on the right. The whole area was cleared out, the ground was levelled, and it was reseeded where necessary. All the surrounding walls were rebuilt, pointed and capped. After the initial clean-up of the Abbey ruins, thoughts turned to restoration work. The Anco Training Authority of the time was contacted, and after discussions, it decided to take the project in hand. Under its youth employment scheme, Anco paid the labour costs of recruiting local personnel who were skilled in the laying of stone. The labour force here consisted of a foreman, a stonemason and 12 to 14 young people for the duration of the project from November 1984 until June 1986. The Office of Public Works drew up the specification needed for the project in consultation with an architect who was a member of the Preservation Committee, and that architect continued to oversee the entirety of the project, giving his services free of charge. All materials needed for the project were purchased by the Preservation Committee, while all stone needed was donated by members of the local community. Funds were raised locally through house-to-house collections, fundraising dances, donations from people who had grown up in and left the area, as well as some generous donations made by the Bishop of Salzburg and by an American citizen living locally. In total, the Preservation Committee raised around £16,000. Let's take a closer look at the restoration work. All walls were capped with stone slates to prevent rain from damaging the walls afterwards. The east gable was rebuilt to full height and capped. As the west gable was in a dangerous state due to a fire that had damaged all the stonework previously, it was refaced with stone and capped. The south wall had collapsed in parts, and it was rebuilt. The north wall had been removed in the past, and a railing in advanced state of decay was in its place. This was removed, and it was replaced with this stone wall. In Phelan's chapel, all the walls were repaired, pointed and capped. Some of the cut stone at the main door of the abbey was missing and had to be replaced. An altar was built in the abbey. The base of the altar consists of old side panels of tombs from the graveyard, and the altar slab was donated by McKeown Stone in Stradbally. The altar has since become the focal point for the celebration of the annual cemetery mass for Aghaboe graveyard every August. Close to the altar on the right hand side is an original feature. This is known as a piscina. It was used during the celebration of Mass for the washing of the communion vessels and for the washing of the priest's hands. At the bottom of the piscina is a drain known as a sacrarium, which emptied the used water directly back to the earth. The walls surrounding the abbey were repaired and pointed. A gateway was constructed to ensure that the ruins are fully accessible. In 1987, the inscription stone with a summary of the history of the site was erected. The site for the car park was purchased and developed between 1994 and 1995, and in 1999 floodlighting was installed and toilets were erected. The abbey grounds, car park and graveyard continued to be maintained by the Preservation Committee, whose membership is representative of both Catholic and Church of Ireland denominations. During the restoration work, an archaeological dig uncovered some skeletal remains. These were subsequently reinterred at this spot after examination. Another historic feature here, close to the abbey, is the motte and bailey in the adjoining field. In the archaeological inventory of County Laois, this is listed as Aghaboe motte. It is described as a slightly squared off motte with a grass covered stone wall around the edge of the summit, surrounded by a shallow fosse. The remains of a bailey are defined by a scarp to the north. This fortified site was the residence of Adam the Hereford, who was granted lands here at Aghaboe by King Henry II, who ruled from 1154 to 1189. Typically, a motte was a large earth mound topped with a wooden tower known as a keep. This served as a final defensive stronghold and often housed the lord's private quarters. The bailey was a fenced or walled courtyard located at the base of the motte. It contained domestic buildings such as kitchens, stables and workshops, serving as a centre of daily life. The motte and the bailey were often surrounded by a protective ditch or water-filled moat. So, motte and baileys, such as this one at Aghaboe, are a reminder of the Norman invasion of Ireland and the occupation of lands by many Anglo-Norman barons. However, they did decline in popularity as fortified sites by the mid-medieval period, as the introduction of stone into the construction of castles and tower houses became more popular, such as, for example, in this area, the emergence of castles at Gortnaclay, Ballygeehan, Grantstown and Kilbreedy, to name but a few. An excellent interpretive overview of this whole area was unveiled by the Austrian ambassador to Ireland on the Feast of St. Canice, the 11th of October 2025. This work was completed by the Aghaboe Abbey Preservation Committee with the support and collaboration of Laois Heritage Office and Creative Ireland Laois. It is an interpretive depiction of Aghaboe in the year 1400 by artist Stephen Conlon. There are wonderful features on this sign, including a depiction of the friary church with Mass in progress. The motte and bailey are clearly illustrated, with a nearby fish stew pond to its left side. The ruins of the old church burned in 1346 can be seen, including the belfry tower that still stands today. It's worth noting that while the present Church of Ireland is built on the site of that old church, it does not extend as far forward to the front as the old church once did. This new interpretive sign is a really welcome addition to the Aghaboe site and is a hugely valuable resource for locals and for the many visitors who stop off here on a daily basis. Some other points of historical interest are also worth noting here in Aghaboe. What is now the car park was an area used as a fair green in the 18th and 19th centuries. Fairs were held annually on the 1st of August and the 11th of October, the Feast of St. Canice. Faction fights were a regular occurrence here at the fairs. A shebeen operated at the premises at the junction across the road where the unlicensed sale of alcohol took place. The shebeen was owned by a Miss Tracy. Fairs ceased in Aghaboe in the second half of the 19th century. The shebeen premises had other functions over the years, including as a Catholic school, a post office and a private residence. Further on, a Church of Ireland school also operated in the first half of the 20th century in a premises that is now a private residence. And in a house behind that school, a significant eviction occurred on the 28th of May 1881 by the landlord Robert Hamilton Stubber, who lived at Moyne House near Durrow. The matter concerned the lease of 136 acres of grassland in Aghaboe by Miss Mary Dowling, who had two subtenants. The lease on the farm had expired in June 1880, and Stubber had offered Mary Dowling the farm at a new rent of £312 per annum, which was a rent increase of over 9%. Mary Dowling would not agree to the terms of the new lease, but offered instead to pay the old rate and to pay up all outstanding rent arrears. But Stubber would not accept her offer and decided instead to evict her, leading to the events of May 1881. There was a lot of support and sympathy for Mary Dowling in her plight, given that she was only 20 years old and described herself as the eldest of 5 orphans responsible for the younger members of my family. From reports published in the Leinster Express soon after the eviction, we learn that on the day here at Aghaboe, about 1,000 excited people gathered from the surrounding districts, while bands from Borrisonossery, Mountrat and Knockaroo marched around playing national airs. When Thomas Hamilton, RM, arrived with 50 RIC men and 50 men of the 20th Regiment, the Deputy Sub-Sheriff, Thomas Miller, and his bailiffs proceeded to remove 75 cattle from the farm, so that formal possession might be handed over to Stubber. But very considerable obstruction was offered to the sheriff as the cattle were being driven off the land. The bands began to play, the crowd hooted, and the cattle took to their heels. Eventually the bailiffs brought the cattle under control, but when they were about to march them away, the bands played again, the crowds bellowed, and the cattle took off in a canter. Eventually 2 arrests were made, order was restored, and possession of the farm was handed over to Stubber. Afterwards, a public meeting was held on the edge of the farm. A carriage was set up to act as a platform, and it was occupied by 14 speakers, including Mary Dowling and 7 priests. Chairing the meeting was Canon Matt Keefe, parish priest of Aghaboe, who was a long-time supporter of the rights of tenant farmers. He had formed a branch of the Land League at Aghaboe soon after the outbreak of agrarian agitation in 1879, and he became prominent as a spokesman for aggrieved tenant farmers in this county up to the time of his death in 1887, following which he was laid to rest outside the front of Cluck Church, which had been built a decade earlier under his guiding hand. Standing on the platform here at Aghaboe on the day of Mary Dowling's eviction, Canon Keefe spoke against Stubber's vile action of the day. All of the other speakers also denounced Stubber, and the meeting resolved that no man should touch the farm. In her speech, Mary Dowling pointed out that the land had been in the possession of her family for years, and that now all the improvements were to be confiscated. She said she was still willing to pay the original rent, and she concluded by saying, "I cling to the hope that Mr. Stubber will reconsider my case and readmit me to possession of the farm of which I have been so harshly deprived today." In the weeks that followed, Stubber gave in, and he agreed a new lease with Mary Dowling, thereby allowing her cattle to be returned to the Aghaboe lands. A clergyman and historian very worthy of mention in this tour of Aghaboe is Edward Ledwich, who was ordained in the Church of Ireland and became curate in Rathdowney in 1770 before being installed rector of Aghaboe in 1772, where he served until 1797, after which he moved to Dublin. According to the history of the Queen's County, Ledwich in his time here promoted industrial and economic advantages for his parishioners. He built a lime kiln, he encouraged tillage farming, and he donated over 400 woolen or flax wheels to the local cottagers' wives and daughters. While he was rector here, there were 10 wool combers, 10 stuff weavers, 12 linen weavers, and 48 spinners in Aghaboe parish. As a historian, he was noted for his 1790 publication, The Antiquities of Ireland, and he contributed a lengthy statistical account of the parish of Aghaboe that is published in William Shaw Mason's 1814 publication, A Statistical Account or Parochial Survey of Ireland. Ledwich, as rector of Aghaboe, was the most celebrated of the rectors belonging to the Church of Ireland here, and, according to the history of the Queen's County, by all he was greatly loved and respected, living with them on friendly terms, and as a true benefactor. And so, standing here in this historic and sacred place, the feeling and sense of its great heritage and rich past is palpable. That the monastic ruins stand preserved today is a great credit to the foresight, endeavours and sheer hard work of the Aghaboe Abbey Preservation Committee over the last half-century. In recognition of its work, the committee was honoured at a municipal district civic reception on the 11th of March 2026 in the council chamber of Laois County Council in Portlaoise, where they were presented with a certificate of achievement and the gift of a yew tree that will be planted at Aghaboe to add to the natural amenity of the area. I leave Aghaboe Abbey knowing that this jewel in the crown of Laois monastic sites has been given a new lease of life, and today it stands proudly in the rich landscape of Aghaboe as an inspirational reminder of the important role that this monastic site and its inhabitants played soon after the dawn of Christianity and the era of St. Patrick. Until the next time, on Laois History and Folklore, Slán.